David, welcome back to the People Quotient Podcast. Specifically, what differentiates leaders and teams that excel, that win, that going back to our first conversation, at the top of the Lencioni pyramid consistently and constantly, versus those who struggle to get there?
So I think if we think back to the notion of high performance from a team point of view, for those that were listening into that, they'll remember that the absolute foundation of that is trust. Yep. So I would say to folks listening in, whether you're leading a team, or whether you're an organization indeed, or whether you're part of that team, which should be both, right? A leader is all part of the team, which some leaders forget, by the way. But does trust exist? Does trust exist with the breadth and depth that is going to propel us on our journey to high performance? And almost if you did nothing else, but really worked on establishing that to an even deeper level, even if you think you've got it, go deeper, go broader, revisit it. Job number one, without a shadow of a doubt. But with that ongoing, I would say, do I know what my own sense of purpose is?
Yeah.
Am I aware of what the sense of purpose of those who I lead is?
Yeah.
And if the answer to either or both of those questions is no, or I'm not sure, that's where I would focus the rest of my thinking.
Yeah.
And I think those two things, which themselves are, I'm not suggesting that they're easy or kind of one-day wonders, but if you started with those two things, you would do yourself, your team, and your organization a tremendous service, because awareness gives us choice.
Yeah.
And it's the busyness of the day-to-day, it's the pressure of the delivery of the day-to-day that robs us of the chance to raise our awareness. And without that awareness, we have limited choice. And with limited choice, we may not make the right choices. So anything that you can do on these two topics in particular that allows you individually and collectively to raise your awareness, you then have choices to really propel yourself forward. The difficulty in this work, to the extent that it exists, and it does exist, but I always say, well, it's an excuse, is to make the time to get off the treadmill and do some thinking, to get ahead of your thinking. Busyness robs us of that, but that's a choice. Choosing not to do that is a choice. Choosing to do it is a much better choice. Choice common amongst really good leaders and really high performing teams. So make the choice, trust, sense of purpose, work on those two things, draw in some external support if you can to help you in that process. Don't make it a solo journey, but these are the engines that will drive so many things. They drive your own inspiration. They drive your ability to inspire others. They drive your ability to raise the performance of others. They drive your connection with your high-performing team members. They drive your ability to create or to push even further a high-performing team. They are powerful engines, but there has to be a starting point where you do some work on those things.
And I think what I like about that, David, is also, like, I would say that they're both, it's almost like the two circles of a Venn diagram is the visual that I'm sort of getting, which is you can operate on one circle and that'd be fine, and if you start operating on the other circle, that's be fine too, independently. But as you start to work on both of them, there's almost like the merging, because awareness will actually allow you to act on things that would build trust, because then people would sort of say, hey, you understand my sense of purpose, as an individual, whether it's a peak performing individual or a high performing team, they can see that their leader understands them. And often I hear that from a lot of teams, especially in the corporate sector, is like, my boss doesn't get me. Like, I'm not sure what I'm doing. I don't understand why we're doing this. I thought we were supposed to do that, but we're doing something else. So I think what that translates to is, for the leader, it's often a case of, are you aware how your team is reacting to all the things, the initiatives and the like value creating drivers, all sorts of fancy labeling that's put onto them, are not really actually creating that much value. And I think it's the lack of awareness in some cases, and we won't go into that because we're talking about best practices, but in some cases, I think to your point, people are choosing not to be aware, but we'll put that aside because, again, this is a podcast series on best practices, not bad practices. So with that said, I think the question really becomes, how does a leader improve their awareness, that of their team, which then increases their insight into purpose themselves and the team. But I think at one point you were making implicitly, but it's like trust will then get fueled. And I think then that's a win because half the time, if not more, I think you just can't build trust if you're not aware. To be honest with you, for you, at least in my experience on the corporate side, because then you're building trust. You think you're building trust, but at best you're building a relationship that may or may not have trust in it. So people may understand what you're saying, but they don't understand what you're saying. Like there's a disconnect. And I often hear that from production floor people and people in the field that, look, corporate has decided this, but I don't know why. It makes no sense to me. And I think that goes back to your point about being able to communicate that sense of purpose, and I think that also comes down to it. So I love it.
Just quickly on that, Rohit,
go ahead.
I think it's an interesting language that you can listen out for. High-performing teams or teams where there really is trust talk about we when they talk about things that are being done or things that are happening. Those that lack it or have less of it talk about they when they talk about things that are happening or things that are being. They have decided, and therefore that informs what I'm now doing or what I'm now executing against. Opposed to, well, what we've decided to do is there's an inclusivity, there's a sense of ownership where trust exists and where hype is emerging. And just listening to the language of a team or an organization gives away where people feel they are at in a live environment in terms of how that organization or how that team currently operate.
Yeah, and I'd add one more to that, which is I. So I often, when I hear a lot of I's, like I have decided this, I have done this, I am doing this, I often, especially on the leadership side, and there's not enough attribution to the team and the we part of it. While sometimes, yes, the leaders, the CEOs, the coaches, the mentors, all of those, the prime ministers have to say, it's my decision, I think this is the right answer. But when it comes to achieving results, if it's still I, then I think that's the flip of what you're saying as well, which is like, well, hang on a minute, that's we're missing the other 9,000 people in the organization.
And my personal view is go with purpose as your North Star rather than legacy. Part of the reason I say that, Rohit, is because
subscribe to the People Quotient channel where leadership meets action. Powerful conversations with practical insights that you can use right now. See you in the next episode.